I define, high stakes leadership as those moments when somebody needs to step up and be a leader when the pressure's on. And so it's being able to, make those decisions and care for your people in those high stakes when the pressure's still on to still produce results, but also still to be able to keep your people safe and being able to balance both because you
Yeah.
can do both, right? Organizations can do both. You can be really great at your job and you can also be really safe. We don't need to compensate one for the other where it's like, you know what? We're going to drive results today and I don't care how we get there, but we're going to get it done. And if we got to take some shortcuts and cut some corners, it's going to be okay. We can
Yeah.
do both at the same time.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation.
And today our guest is Patrick Nelson. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm doing fantastic, Judith. Thank you for having me.
No, it's good to have you on. Patrick, let me think. Do you have a favourite fruit?
A favorite fruit? Wow. I do. Yeah, and it's probably something very very simple, but I really enjoy a good apple.
Red or green?
They're actually kind of reddish green. So I'm a big fan of Honeycrisp apples. And so what I love about apples these days is, as opposed to probably when we were kids, there weren't a lot of different options. It was just red or green. But now there's so many different varieties of apples available at the supermarkets these days. It's crazy. So I'm a big fan of a Honeycrisp apple, but I've also come to like the Cosmic Crisp apples as well. If you haven't tried them, give
No,
it a try.
I've not heard of any of those. Are these American ones?
These are American ones, yeah. And actually, the Honeycrisp was, I guess, invented, you could say, here in the state of Minnesota, where I'm at. With some very smart scientists and researchers, as they breed the seeds, or I don't even know the proper nomenclature for it, but how they do the hybrid of the seeds together, and they've created some pretty amazing things.
You've actually made it sound quite exciting. So the next time I'm in the States, I'm going to look them up. I'm going to look them
Absolutely.
up. Patrick, tell us a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So my long story short, I grew up in rural Minnesota, a very rural place, true to the word. No stoplights in the town, less than 1,000 people. Growing up, I had a pretty tough childhood. My mom was single, 19, unemployed, living on government assistance. Growing up, I saw drugs in the house. Sixth grade, I'm walking out of school. Mom's getting arrested, placed in the back of a police car. In 11th grade, my stepsister committed suicide in rehab. I ran away from home when I turned 16, took my mom to court because I didn't want to live there. It was a pretty tough childhood, but it also could have been worse. I barely graduated high school, stumbled my way into a small community college in rural Minnesota, obviously not having the type of family take me on college visits or fill out any of the paperwork. And so I did it all myself. And 3 weeks into the first semester, 9/11 happened. 2 days later, dropped out of college and joined the Army. One of the best decisions I made in my life. And that has landed me to speaking here with you today.
Well, I think a lot of people joined up after 9/11, didn't they?
Yeah, there were many people that joined up after 9/11. And the interesting thing is, I myself, and I'm sure many others, we signed up for, all those patriotic reasons, those feelings in the moment. But when you're in, it's just another job. You don't think of like America, it's just not like that. It's just, we probably wake up a little bit earlier than most people at their jobs and maybe stay a little later. But it wasn't until I got out of the Army and I kind of became a lazy college kid again. And I started reflecting on, wow, I used to have such a big purpose in my life. And now here I am again, a lazy college kid, playing video games. How am I ever going to have a purpose again in life? But thankfully, I've been able to find it after many years, many trials and failures of having a purpose again and being able to inspire others and influence the future.
Sounds brilliant. Sounds really cool. Okay, so I'm a bit curious because one of the things that you said was that you had a pivotal moment when your leadership decision cost a soldier's life, forever altering your perspective on leadership. So you can't throw that down and then just walk off. So you need to explain what's going on there.
Yeah. So on my first deployment to Afghanistan, it was my second deployment overall. It was June 8th, 2005. We're operating out of a very small forward operating base near the Pakistani border, and we're getting resupplied to some ammunition by a helicopter. It was something we basically did every single week. And so right before we drove out to that landing zone, I hopped in a Humvee with my good buddy Luke. And right before we drove out to the landing zone, my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, hopped in the back of the Humvee. And I turned around and I noticed he didn't have his helmet on. And so I literally opened my mouth to yell at him. But of course, I all of a sudden realized I don't have mine on either. It's obviously kind of hard for me to say something if I'm not doing the right thing. So I didn't say anything. The helicopter landed. A group of 10 of us stepped to the side of the aircraft so we could get ready to start unloading it. We couldn't hear each other. It's hot. And the next thing I know, it was just bam, everything went dark. And I was laying on the ground, disoriented, couldn't hear anything. And all of a sudden, the helicopter powers down, and I just hear the very distinct whistle of an incoming rocket. And rockets just start impacting all around. I get up, I dive underneath the Humvee for cover. Of course, as I'm laying there, I kind of realize what's going on. And so as this barrage finally ends, I crawl out from underneath the Humvee and I start making my way back to the rest of the soldiers that are laying on the ground, really unsure what I was going to find. And it was at that point, somebody yelled from behind me that I'd been hit. And up until that point, I hadn't felt any pain, but kind of turned and looked at the back of my uniform and it was shredded and blood was starting to pour out. And of course, that was the moment the pain all of a sudden hit me. And the other soldiers quickly triaged those of us that were hurt and brought us to this small clinic on our base that was ran by an Afghan doctor. Now, my wounds were very, very minor compared to everybody else. I was peppered in the back, some shrapnel, some small holes, nothing too serious. But my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, unfortunately took shrapnel to his head and was killed. And he died because I wasn't doing the right thing, because I didn't have the courage to speak up and to say something. And of course, there's been so many days since then where I thought, how simple it would have been if I would have just said, guys, wait, come on, let's go get our helmets. And nothing would have been delayed. And it was a situation, Judith, where I beat myself up for a long time after that incident, tried to drink my problems away, tried to wash them away with pills. I was addicted to Vicodin and morphine for 5 years. Of course, none of that works, right? Those only serve as accelerants for challenges I was already facing. But like I said, I've learned that I can take my story, I can inspire others, and I can influence the future.
That must have been absolutely awful.
It was awful, but something that helped me, and it again, it sounds very simple, but it's a lot more difficult to do, is shifting that perspective and realizing that I obviously can't change the past. There is absolutely nothing that I can do to change that moment, but I can take that and I can do something with it to honor Emmanuel and Michael Kelly, who was also killed that day, unfortunately. And, for myself, I went down that dark path, struggling with addiction and getting stuck in a very sort of fixed mindset where I was letting that one event define who I was in a very negative way. But thankfully, I had some great people around me that saw the path that I was going down, and they knew where it ended. And it wasn't going to be pretty. And so thankfully they were able to, give me the right resources that I needed to get out of that, break free those bonds of addiction, and learn that I've got a gift of being able to speak with others, to stand up and speak in front of crowds, and to share a message in a very engaging and powerful way. And doing that, when you're purpose driven is something that really drives me and keeps me going to this day.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I think that speaks about a lot of things, really. As you said, leadership's about being courageous. And it's also about ensuring that there's the right culture. Because if you think about it, maybe others should have pointed out that you weren't wearing your helmet.
Yeah,
rather than it being hierarchical.
Right. We mirror the behavior of others around us, for better or for worse. If we're not doing the right thing leadership wise, how can we expect that out of others? And something that's interesting, Judith, is, I cut my teeth in the military as far as it comes to leadership. One of the best leadership laboratories in the world, and also one of the most bureaucratic organizations out there. We wear our rank on our uniform every single day. Everybody knows exactly where you stand in the hierarchy of command, yet you can still find leaders at the lowest level. They're not in charge of anything. It's all about their behaviors. And so leadership's not a position or a title. It's the behaviors that we possess. Oftentimes I'll ask people, I say, hey, can you describe to me a perfect leader if one ever existed? And they say all the stuff that we already know. They're empathetic, they're good listeners, good communicators, they're motivating, they have integrity, they're fair, they're honest. We all know that. We know what good leadership looks like. Nobody ever tells me, well, they're the boss. They're in charge of people, because you don't have to be in charge of people to be empathetic. You don't have to be in charge of people to be a good listener. Those are skills and behaviors that I firmly believe every single person can develop with the right experiences and the right knowledge. I like to say we manage things. It might be data, processes, equipment, schedules, but we lead people. We expect managers to be leaders, but I'd venture to say most of the listeners right now have had a manager who they would not consider to be the best leader. When we manage people, we usually get compliance. We do what they tell us to do because we have to. But when we lead people through influence, we're able to tap into discretionary effort. The effort that people give not because they have to, but because they want to.
Yeah, I like that, because I've always said that leaders lead on the goodwill of others, and the organizations tend to, maybe not so much in the military, but certainly in other organizations, they tend to forget that it's the goodwill that makes things happen.
It absolutely is. It's all about the people.
All right then. So following, because you were saying that following what happened, and thank you for being vulnerable enough to share it so others can learn. You're saying that this event kind of pivoted you into high stakes leadership. What do you mean by that?
It did. Actually, when I first got out of the military, I actually ended up going to work in professional sports. I thought that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. That's where my formal education first took me. And, I got to do some pretty cool work in the National Football League, which, in America is the most popular sport. And it was, I got to work with the team that I grew up cheering for as a young child, my dream job at the time, but didn't take me long to realize it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And from there, I would just started kind of sharing my story, and I started seeing the impact that I was having on others. And especially I found a real passion and purpose as it pertains to that high stakes leadership when it comes to, safety at work. I'm not a professional safety person. I can't talk to people about all the regulations and the rules and how to wear this or how to wear that. But I've learned that I can take my story, I can take my knowledge and experiences, and I can share them with people to give them the courage to be able to speak up as it pertains to safety and those high stakes moments in leadership.
Let's listen to a quick advert.
As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com. Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
So, have you always been in the military?
I signed up 2 days after 9/11, and I left the Army in December 2008. So I did 6 years, 10 months, and 22 days. Not that I was counting or anything.
So what are the biggest differences do you see from, because you was a paratrooper, right? So
Correct.
So what differences do you see from your military experience to being out of the military?
So the interesting thing that I first saw when I got out, again, I joined the military, I was still 18 years old. So I was very...
You were a baby.
I was a baby. I was still very much in those early forming stages of, so the military taught me a lot of things, and it's very simple things that I didn't quite understand the civilian world. It just, as far as being on time, that was one of the smallest things that I've noticed is people kind of play loose with the time. Not everybody, but many people did. And it was just something that kind of bothered me. There was like a lack of discipline and accountability
Mm.
that I noticed. And for myself, if you can't get the small things right, I have a very difficult time trusting you when it comes to the things that truly matter.
I'm laughing because on the podcast over the years, we've had all sorts of military across lots of different countries, from Air Force, Army, Navy, NORAD, all sorts. And that's one of the doesn't matter what country or what part of the service, but that is the thing that everyone talks about, getting the small things done, um, has been the difference in the fact that there's more. I don't know if this is the case for you, but from what I understand from the military that's been on, it's not a command and control leadership structure. It's more, I don't know, more the leadership is at the coalface, at the root. Is that the same where you were?
Yeah, I definitely think it boils down to culture. Simon Sinek, one of the great leadership gurus out there, a lot of great books right now. He's actually spent a lot of time embedded with the military, and I think Simon has said it the best: is it's not like you have these great people that are destined to do amazing things joining the military. Often it's quite the opposite. Many of us coming from broken homes and dysfunctional backgrounds, but it's amazing what people will do when you put them in the right environment, when you have the culture right. And we see that in the military. And of course, look, the military, it should go without saying, but a lot of that is life and death situations. In the civilian world, chances of you getting a rocket shot at you are extremely minor. But what I've learned is that the same principles that I learned and cut my teeth on in the military still apply in the civilian world as far as it comes to building those sort of mature cultures in organizations where people truly care about each other. In the military, I saw both sides. I saw good leadership, but I saw bad leadership. And, one of the leaders that stands out for me and that I wrote about in my book is a guy by the name of John Post. So John Post at the time, he was just a young lieutenant, just a couple years out of the United States Military Academy, basically out of college. But what he lacked in experience, he more than made up for in his leadership behaviors, because John Post is the type of guy that he could sit you down and just tell you the 12 different ways you sucked at life. But you'd leave the conversation with a smile on your face because you knew that guy cared about you. He wanted to see you succeed, and he's going to be by you every single step of the way, giving you every single tool and resource that you need to be successful.
Yeah, I like that. And what I was thinking when you was talking there was that great leaders notice. So they notice things about you. So
They do. And I think, again, the great thing about the military is I got to work with such a diverse group of people. Everybody has different needs that motivate them and that drive them. And so I learned from John Post, it's about getting to know people, building those authentic relationships, and how we can tap into each other.
if you want to, could you tell me a bit about your Bronze Star Medal and your Purple Heart?
Yeah, so the Purple Heart Medal was a medal that I earned for getting wounded in combat. You don't even really need to do anything to earn it. It's basically a medal that was, I think, first made up by George Washington many years ago. His face is on the back of it, and it's just given to soldiers who are wounded by enemy fire. The Bronze Star Medal I earned on my last deployment to Afghanistan for meritorious service in a combat zone, and that was a 15-month deployment to Afghanistan. And our mission had changed several times from, border control operations, working directly with Afghanistan Border Control Police, to operating out of very rugged terrain in the mountains of Northeast Afghanistan in very difficult environments. And so that deployment was a very tough one. I'd done 12 months in Iraq. I'd done 12 months in Afghanistan, and my last one for 15 months. Was very difficult as well. And so basically spending a little over 3 years out of 5 years in combat certainly can take its toll on people.
Yeah, that must have been really tough. And it's how do people? I'm curious actually. How do people view you as an ex-soldier when you're doing your other work?
Yeah, I certainly think it brings a lot of credibility, at least from my experiences. And obviously, what I can speak to is I've seen people that go into organizations sometime, and you don't have to be serving the military to, speak about leadership and inspire others. But I've seen people that go into organizations and they're great speakers, but they don't really bring the pedigree or the background. They've never really led anybody themselves. And so
Mm.
the military, people just know the military and it brings a lot of instant credibility. Like, okay, this person, I should listen to him because, they've probably been in some situations where, the stakes are pretty high.
Mm. I've heard military people say that they found that civilian life leadership is a lot easier because, from their perspective, if no one's dying, it's not that bad. Is that something that you would agree with?
I agree with to a certain extent, and that's certainly something that I've been challenged with.
Mm.
Is where I've been guilty of it myself, where the stakes, well, nobody's going to die here, so I guess everything's going to be okay. But at the same time, I think people still need to be able to perform. They still need to be able to produce results at the same time, and we can't just excuse it as well, nobody died, so we're all good here. We can't measure
Oh,
success that way.
I don't see it. Sorry, I should have been clearer. I didn't get that's what they meant when they said it. I think what they were saying to me was that they found that decision making isn't hard once they've been in the military. So they were saying that at the end of the day, people aren't dying. This is a decision that can, whatever it is, can be made because it's not a life and death decision. I guess that's what they meant, as opposed to just going, oh, well, being cavalier about it. That's not what I meant.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that distinction. Yeah, it's definitely easier to make those decisions when the stakes might be a little bit lower. Um, when I look at one of the great things I learned about the military, though, was being decisive and, making a decision and being able to live with it and go on and, not getting caught up in that analysis paralysis, which I've seen so much in the civilian world where people will just sit there and think things out and chew things out, and they do it for just such an extended period of time
Mm,
where the
mm.
moment has passed by. I think you obviously have to do your due diligence, but at some time you have to make a decision, and it may not always be the popular one, but you need to do it, and that's what good leaders do.
Yeah, making a decision that you can live with and making it fast enough, not necessarily quickly, but
Right.
fast enough. I think that's, whilst I've never been in the military, I noticed that when I came out of retail and went into corporate, because it felt to me like the decisions made in corporate took so long and was agonized over for far longer than it needed to be. It was a
Hmm.
complete culture shock to discover something that you would do and live with and commit like the store for the next year. And that decision, with all the research and everything it's to do, was made in less than a day, would be the equivalent of maybe 6 months to 8 months in the corporate. But the stakes weren't any particularly higher, for example. It just took longer. That
Right.
took a while to kind of go, oh, I really need to do something about this. Let's speed people up.
Yes.
So before we finish, I'm just curious though, because you talked about navigating high stakes leadership, but you didn't actually really define what high stakes leadership was or how to navigate. So I think we should take the conversation there.
Yeah. So again, I define, high stakes leadership as those moments when somebody needs to step up and be a leader when the pressure's on. I work with a lot of great organizations. A lot of them are very blue collar type jobs. They're not the most glamorous jobs in the world,
Mm.
but they're the jobs that help make this world go round. And a lot of these jobs, they have a lot of pressure on them to be able to perform every single day. Well, at the same time, they also have very high risks when it comes to safety. And so it's being able to, make those decisions and care for your people in those high stakes when the pressure's still on to still produce results, but also still to be able to keep your people safe and being able to balance both because you
Yeah.
can do both, right? Organizations can do both. You can be really great at your job and you can also be really safe. We don't need to compensate one for the other, where it's like, you know what? We're going to drive results today, and I don't care how we get there, but we're going to get it done. And if we got to take some shortcuts and cut some corners, it's going to be okay. We can
Yeah.
do both at the same time.
Hmm. So to navigate at high stakes requires an ability to really understand what is going on, what the variables and drivers are, the priorities, and the time, I guess. So do you think that's easier to juggle for those that have had those early experiences, stressful experiences that you've been in, or do you think anyone can do that with just reflection and thought?
I think anyone can do almost anything with the right experiences and knowledge.
Mm.
You know, being a great leader isn't exclusive to being a military veteran. I know many, many great leaders who never served in the military at all. But what I found, what differentiates them is they've sought out experiences in their life that's going to test them.
Mm.
You know, when I think about what it actually takes to become a better leader, it's not just sitting through a leadership workshop and taking an assessment. And I mean, those are great. And, you know, new knowledge and reflection, I think, are part of becoming a better leader. But, you know, 70% of becoming a better leader is you're out there, you're actually doing it. You know, you're actually pounding the pavement. And so what I found in exceptional leaders is that they seek out opportunities and experiences to step outside their comfort zone and do things that they may not necessarily be good at. And they know they might fail, but they know they're also going to learn a heck of a lot.
I like that. That's very maverick leaders in the sense of actually sort of seeking out those kind of challenging experiences. It made me think of my first HR role was head of HR in a retail organization with about 1,000 employees. And that was one of those things, the difference between time served and experience. It's like I remember being in one particular store that we were doing. I had arrived there, and I realised that we would ended up doing like 20 disciplinaries a week. It was a particularly interesting store, I should say. And the disciplinaries weren't lateness; they were like, you know, big, long collusions for theft, and it was just like all this major stuff. And I remember I was quite young at the time. Colleagues in corporates going, "Oh, you're working for a retailer. Oh, that's fun." And I thought, but the last thing that you've done is like, I don't know, a disciplinary for absence. And I'm dealing with stuff that we've called the police in because it's a criminal, it's a crime, you know. And it's just like that kind of people sometimes look and say, "Oh, this person's in this experience, they're a poor leader," but without actually looking at what they're required to do and the comparison of that.
Right.
So I think that can be quite interesting. So before we wrap up, is there anything I should have asked you and didn't, and you're like, "Oh, that woman's crazy"? Because if there is, tell me all about it now.
You know, sometimes I'll have people ask me, if you could tell me one thing, one piece of advice that you think could help me start being a more effective leader now. And my advice is the same to anybody. I don't care if you're in grade 6, and I don't care if you're 55 years old and a CEO of a company. We need to learn how to be able to manage our emotionally driven reactions and
Love
use
it.
more thought out responses instead. And I actually have a great tool I'd love to share with your listeners,
Mm.
Judith. One of my former colleagues used to fly F-16 fighter jets in the Air Force. And one day he came up to me. He said, "Hey, what do you think one of the first things they taught me in fighter pilot training is when an alarm would go off in the cockpit?" I was like, "I don't know. You push a bunch of buttons and flip some switches and, you call Mayday on the radio and then you eject." He said the very first thing they taught him to do was to wind the clock, because you can't break anything by winding the clock. And when you're going Mach 3 at 18,000 feet and that alarm goes off, instead of that instant fear-driven reaction, you wind the clock. And it makes your brain take that brief pause to sort of kick into gear and use a more thought-out response. And so I mean, it's worked wonders in my professional life and my personal life. I like to joke, if my wife and I are ever having a disagreement and I want to say something, but I know I'm only going to dump a little more fuel on the fire. I'm only going to make it probably worse. I literally just kind of wind the clock. I take a step back, take a breath, re-engage. If people across the world can just learn how to manage their reactions and use more thought-out responses instead, I think we'll all be better off.
Oh, I love that. It's one of the things I talk to people when I'm mentoring is that kind of putting the pause in so that you're responding, not reacting. You're going,
Absolutely.
you're trying to use your brain rather than your emotions to do something. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I think one of the things that I do is I just say, think in my breathing. So I immediately start to breathe from the diaphragm just so that slows the heartbeat down so stops the brain from panicking, and then you can actually, again, it's that kind of using your body to send the right signals to the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've had some very smart guests on talking neuroscience, and we know all that stuff that goes on in our brains and with the cortisol and the dopamine and the serotonin and all that great stuff. And, there are things that we can do to help override those reactions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Patrick.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Judith.
No, it's been pretty cool. Thank you. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am your host, Judith Germain, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.